Today, Elijah White, retired VP from Exxon Mobil, graduate of UNC Chapel Hill, godly father, faithful husband, righteous servant, man of God, generous friend, disciplined steward, and strategic planner. And now, producing from Wisdom's Pipeline. What's the word, Brother White?
The word is it's a wonderful day in the house of the Lord, because every house I'm in is the house of the Lord. So thank God that we're here, and thank God for this conversation.
Now, if anything has taught us that, it is COVID. Yeah. Remember, we were once in a structure where we always worshiped in a church building, but now literally your house is really the house of God. So has it been a tough adjustment for you?
Not at all. I think, it's one of those things that, people learn to morph with the times, or just whatever word that you want to learn. But when you've got goals and objectives, you've always got to have a pivot plan. And to me, COVID has forced us to have some real pivot plans in there. And we can sit in the house and we can mourn and we can, gripe and do all kinds of things, or we can just get on with the program. And thank God that there's technology that allows us to continue with the program. So, we haven't skipped a beat. I don't know if Pastor wants to hear this or not, but I like the fact that I don't have to get up and get dressed sometimes to listen to it.
Oh,
he can't
Lord.
see me. I can still hear him.
Yeah.
So, we're always on time. I can't say the truth when we were, transporting ourselves through our vehicle. But no, I think, we've managed it very well. My wife has gone back to work now. I've retired, so it's really a life of leisure for me. So no issues.
Well, what a blessing that is. And I'm glad that you brought that into light, because, man, one of the things that causes us to suffer the most, I would say, is not just the tragedies that we encounter or the turmoil that we encounter, but it's not having a plan A, and then not having a plan B. Yeah. So you talked about this thing called a pivot plan, and I know that's something that is big in corporate world. Why isn't it more prevalent in our own individual lives?
I think because we get comfortable in our own skins. I think too many times, and I'll use myself as an example, because I've made many mistakes in I'll call it my professional career, if you will. But most of those mistakes are not things that anybody outside of me or my household would even recognize. And it's because I got comfortable in my own plan. Now, fortunately, I had a good plan and it worked. And any plan has a broad bandwidth, or should have a broad bandwidth, because it's very hard to walk that skinny white line in the middle of the road. So you need to give yourself some wiggle room. And if you've got a decent plan that allows you to pivot a little bit left or right, I think most people are going to be fine. I think the people who really find themselves in trouble are folks who don't have a plan, or have a plan that is too specific with no pivot plan, if you will, involved.
Now, that was one of the things that I was going to ask you, because remember I told you I wanted to really talk and pick your brain about this money.
Yeah.
But at the same token, one of the things I wanted to ask you about is you also said that you're retired.
Yeah.
Did you start planning for retirement day one, or was this something where you looked up and you were 35 and said, you know what, let me get this done?
Yeah. Day one sometimes is a day too late. You really need to be thinking about it as you start. Yeah. Just an interesting story. I remember when my first daughter was born, and of all people, I started talking to my insurance agent about saving for my daughter, because insurance companies actually have a savings plan. I know that sounds hard to believe. And basically, he said that if you wait till she's 5 years old, you're probably too late. You need to start now. So, I fortunately worked for a company that actually still has a 401k, has a savings plan, and all those things. And even then, I made lots of mistakes, just because I'm going to use the term ignorance, and maybe it's just uneducation. Maybe that's a better word for it, because I didn't come from a family that had money. I knew nothing about the financial world. I know you go to work, you make a salary, and you pay bills. That's kind of what I came into it with. And so in terms of the right avenues to save, but the company had a saving plan and you put money into it. You could put 6%. The max you could put in was 7%. A lot of people put very little in it. Some people say, well, I'll wait 10 years till I do it. But the right thing to do is start day one. And even if you only put in a small percentage of it, and we used to call it back before you were born, saving saving for a rainy day. Our parents used to put a little money under the mattress or whatever, saving for that rainy day. And this is kind of that same thing. And you do need to have a plan for that rainy day. And that plan is a simple one. I have a certain lifestyle while I am employed. What do I want my lifestyle to be when I am no longer employed or when I'm retired? And that's kind of the plan you need to save for, with the understanding you don't control most of that. In terms, we all assume we're still going to be in great health when we retire. Fortunately, and thank God I am at this point. We all assume that, we have no outside issues going on, lawsuits, whatever you want to bring into it. And so it's just going to be straightforward. It's hard to plan for those outside events. But, again, have a wide road that you're planning for and kind of stay with it. And you got to stay with it. That is the main thing.
And of course, the cost of living will stay the same.
Yeah, well, we all know that that's not the case, right? But again, I will tell you my plan, as I was planning for retirement, when I retire, I wanted to maintain my standard of living. I know people who have done it. They've retired, they've gotten a big pot of money, and then they go invest it in something risky. Some of them have done very well. Unfortunately, most of them have not. And my plan was I retired at 60. If you start trying to get rich at 60 and spend every penny you got, the difference between 60 and 25, if I lose all my money at 25, you know what? I can continue working and I can grow that money back. When you get to 60, that becomes a little bit more problematic. And so my plan again was maintain a standard of living. I'm not trying to get filthy rich, from this point on. I like my lifestyle. What can I be doing now that I'm 25 that makes sure that when I'm 60, I can maintain a standard of living that I have enjoyed, for those years in between.
Now, when you did that, let me ask you: Did you have a dollar amount in mind, like I'm going to save a certain amount of money, or were you thinking more along the line of handling debts and managing your assets?
All of the above. I wouldn't even say there was a dollar amount involved. I would say that there was a percentage of what I have today that I'm going to set aside, to build towards the future. And I learned a lesson early on because, some of the advantages of the company that I work with is you could buy into a savings plan where you could just put it in, it's called unallocated cash. You just put cash in there, the company would match what you put in there, and then basically it just sits there and it gains interest for many, many years, right? My awakening was a couple of years after I'd been working, the company had a stock split. And I was asking everybody, what is a stock split? I knew nothing about finances, and they kind of explained to me. So let's say I've got, 10 shares that are worth $10. Now the company splits it. So now I've got 20 shares that are worth $5. So the dollar amount is the same. But guess what? Over time, as that stock grows, now, I've basically doubled my value, if you will. Well, my cash wasn't doing that. I goes, hey, wait a minute, why did I do that? So, I turned all that unallocated cash and started buying into the stock plan. And what I really didn't know is that stock also played a dividend. So not only is the value going up, but every quarter I got paid money because of that. And those are things that nobody taught me. And so I went in to see one of our HR representatives. I said, man, I have some really stupid questions for you. Can you help me? And he just laughed and he pulled out a piece of paper out of his drawer. He said, the reason I have this piece of paper is because guess what? You're not the only stupid one. There's a whole lot of folks talking to you about this. So welcome to the club. And so, and he's a firm believer, and so am I. There's no such thing as a stupid question.
Yeah. I would agree with that. And I think that's one of the challenges that we all face. And that is why I try to have sit downs with brothers like yourself, because a lot of times when the Bible says we perish for lack of knowledge, we have access to the knowledge, we just don't seek it, or we're too prideful to ask for it. So one of the questions I did have for you was, who taught you your basic financial principles, and then also who helped mentor you and shape you? And one of the concerns that I had is, even when I talk to some of our young brothers and sisters who are entering into corporate, is the person that shaped them. First of all, a lot of us come from a background where we don't have money, or our parents are not highly educated, or they're good with saving but not sophisticated with investing and really understand that next level of what to do with money. So you have people that enter into corporate America with that same baseline, and because they don't have a mentor, they don't get to invest and do the things they need to do to gain their financial freedom until much later.
Yeah. Well, it's just like many things. I have a network of mentors, if you will, and I would say that that's been very fortunate to me. But I'll pivot for a second and say it's important to watch lots of people, because there are lots of people that I have learned from that I want to emulate and be just like them. But there are also people I've watched and says, okay, that's not the road I want to take.
Yes.
So, it's important to have a broad, outlook of things, and because, we do need to have measurements, those things that are not measured. I mean, how do you know you're succeeding if you have no measurements, right? And so I had a broad group of mentors. Some of them were in the church. Now, where I grew up at in the church, there was not a lot of money to be had. But I watched those people took care of their families. They didn't want for anything. And so I watched how they did things. And it was about budgeting. It was about realistic expectations based on the financial situation they were in. And it was all about making sure that everybody understood, what brings us happiness? What are those things that are the priorities for us? So that was the main thing for me when it came to things. What are my priorities? Set those priorities aside. When you're a single man, priorities are very different than when you become, a family man with, wife and kids. Those priorities should change anyway. Every man at least I think every man, every little boy at some point wanted a red Porsche.
Yeah.
My first family vehicle was a minivan. Far from it. But I tell you, I had it decked out. It was a good looking minivan, right?
Yeah, you had it decked out.
Had the rims on it and everything else. But you know what? That was a priority for my family. I never did get that red Porsche because fortunately, before I was able to afford that Porsche, I realized it wasn't the car for me anyway. So never went that route. But to get back to who those mentors are, I had many mentors. All of them were not identified as mentors. Sometimes it was just in the conversations like you and I have. I'm learning things, and I learned how to apply those to my own life. In my early days, once I came into the corporate world, there were a lot of investment groups that started up. And I went to a couple of them and I listened to things, and I listened to some of the groups in terms of what their goals and objectives were and how they basically did things. And Dell was one of the big stocks that these guys, basically decided they were going to invest in. And I'll make up numbers, they all invested, let's just say $10,000. And when that got up to about $30,000, they were all ready to cash out. And now if you follow Dell, because there was a study that was done, it was done many years ago, and it was based on, if you had $10,000 and you put that $10,000 in Dell, in Walmart, and in Exxon, at that time it was before the merger, and stay there for 8 years. The Exxon had a great return. That $10,000 in 8 years became $29,000. Okay? That $10,000 in Walmart in 8 years became $1.2 million. That same $10,000 after 8 years in Dell became $2.1 million. And here I am thinking my $29,000 is a great deal, but look what Dell and Walmart did. You would have never guessed Walmart. Dell, you might have guessed, right? And so those brothers that pulled out at the 30,000 missed a great opportunity. Here's the problem though. They still made $20,000, right? But guess what? Had they stayed in it too long, they would have lost their shirts.
Join us next week for Producing from Wisdom's Pipeline